Okay. All right, everyone. Well, Bill Wasik, who's going to be talking with us today, has been called the inventor of the flash mob, which is a term for a crowd of people that suddenly assembles in a public place, like a department store, does something bizarre, then disperses. From pillow fights to silent discos to a throng of amateur mimes at Grand Central Station, flash mobs have erupted into our culture. Will they disperse as quickly as they arrived, or will they continue to evolve? What role will the internet have in this sort of viral culture and other impact that it might have? These are sort of some questions that Mr. Wasik will discuss with us today. So we're happy to have Mr. Wasik here. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Wasik.
Hi, I'm Bill. It's Wasik, by the way, but it doesn't matter. I don't really care. So yes, I've learned that I should bring the connector for my laptop because we don't have it, and so I had to export my PowerPoint file as a movie, which I'll be pausing and unpausing. So I hope you enjoy. I'm Bill Wasik. I am a senior editor at Harper's Magazine, and I'm the author of the book And Then There's This. How Stories Live and Die in Viral Culture. As he said, it sort of grew out of my interest in this subject grew out of this experience that I had starting what I thought was a little comedy project in the summer of 2003, where I would get people to come to a show by sending them an email, and I suddenly had the thought, well, what if there was no show? What if instead what people were being gathered together from this viral email was in fact just nothing at all, people coming together for no reason? Before that time, I had been, an editor at a political literary magazine and a sort of sometime stand-up comic. But after that experience, I became very interested in the internet and how these new phenomena were spreading. Not just internet memes, but I also became very interested in some of the other areas that I had considered as a journalist and as an editor, areas like politics or indie rock, different kind of aspects of society that had parts of the discourse that had gone online, and on some level by going online, it had changed those discourses. And so this book sort of represents my, essentially at this point 6 years of wanderings through this world. It's really sort of a first-person book of narrative journalism. It makes stabs at being an idea book here and there. I also sort of try to be entertaining where I can, but that's the book, and I will talk about it, and hopefully you guys might have some questions. The word viral is all over my book. The history of viral as it pertains to media goes back to Richard Dawkins with the meme idea, which was late 70s in The Selfish Gene. But it's sort of in sort of the kind of early days of the internet iteration. Douglas Rushkoff published a book called Media Virus. In around 97, the word viral marketing the term viral marketing was sort of put out in the public discourse by the founders of Hotmail. This is before it was owned by Microsoft. If you're talking about the way that the viral idea has spread through the general population, you certainly would have to talk about Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, which at this point has been on the bestseller list for literally 9 straight years on the hardback book and then on the paperback bestseller list. And today, if you search your Google, Go Viral gets you 987,000 hits, and lots of other permutations of viral will get you similar results. So the expression viral has gone viral. So it's all over my book, and just before my galleys are about to come out in February 2009, Henry Jenkins at MIT and some colleagues published a white paper called "If It Doesn't Spread, It's Dead." And the premise of this white paper was that we shouldn't use the word viral anymore. What they want to do is get rid of the word viral and replace it with the word spreadable. And so this, I greeted the arrival of this paper and the fact that it was it itself became very popular. I greeted it with great consternation. I worried that by June 2009, when my book came out, the word viral might be over, and that I would be the laughingstock of not only the publishing but also the technological community for having ever used it. Jenkins made some very good points about the word viral. One of them being that it potentially insults message consumers by casting them as passive. The metaphor of the virus is one where the virus is on some level the agent doing the work. So a related kind of corollary to that is that it causes message creators to overestimate their creative powers. So, with the viral metaphor, people who are out there, whether it's they're doing marketing or they're making, they're doing blog posting or they're making anything that's designed to spread, his concern is that the word viral leads to a certain kind of creative arrogance where people think they can develop a killer piece of media that will go out and just purely from its own contagious powers go out and infect the whole population. And by the same token, it overlooks how much messages are remixed by consumers. Jenkins's point, which is absolutely correct, is that most or many acts of viral transmission are not just pure replication where I take a message and I pass it along. A lot of it is I make a modification to it, I create my own spin on it. Even if I'm just forwarding along a link, I'm giving my interpretation of it. I'm trying to put my own imprint on this thing, and so it's not just replication, it's remixing. But I would say that there are sort of equal and opposite troubles with spreadable. By the same token, the word spreadable potentially insults message consumers by casting them as fanboys and fangirls. It seems incredibly presumptuous to imagine that everything that you make that you want people to forward around is going to develop some really intense remixing community where people are going to spend a lot of time, doing their own version of the message. Most forwards today are still, you get the thing in email from somebody, you think it looks fun, you pass it along to somebody else, and then you get on with your busy life and whatever else it is you're doing. I think the word spreadable can cause message creators to overestimate their social standing. There's this really kind of strange idea out there that what everybody's trying to do is create communities around, whether it's their media site or their product. I saw where Heinz Ketchup was having a user-generated ad competition where they invited the customers of Heinz Ketchup to go out and make their own ad campaigns for ketchup. It seems to me that Heinz Ketchup is the kind of product that no matter how much you love it, you're not likely to be inclined to want to spend a bunch of time and pull out your video camera and video editor and make a commercial about it. It's something that you buy because it tastes delicious on your burger and you don't really think about it that much. And to me, the word spreadable tends to overestimate how much messages are remixed by consumers. Again, there is a remixing culture out there. It's an incredibly vital part of the internet, but it's also true that the most common mode of transmission is you get it, you forward it, you go on to something else. So the other complicating factor is, so to back up, part of this idea of insulting consumers with the viral idea, and as I sort of point out, there's something insulting about the spreadable idea as well. I feel like it comes down to this fundamental truth, which is trying to get people you don't know to do what you want them to do is fundamentally arrogant. And I don't mean that in necessarily in a judgmental way. I think any creative endeavor, especially in this sort of very, very attention-poor, information-rich economy, you're going to people whose attention is stretched to the limit, and you're saying, I want some of that. Even if you're not in business, even if you're not doing it for profit, you want people to give them your time and attention. It's an inherently arrogant process, and I feel like that there's often a idea in the tech community that we're going to sugarcoat this not even just in our marketing, but in our own minds by talking about community and by talking about remixing and the idea of empowering consumers. And I absolutely agree that that should be a goal, and that insofar as consumers want to be empowered, that they should be. But the point just being that on some level, it can't be sugarcoated, because the very act of getting up every day, and trying to make a message that someone else is going to take time out of their busy day to pay attention to, there's an arrogance to that. I mean, as much for publishing a print magazine as for creating a website. Complicating this dichotomy between the two, I think, so I like viral, and I'm glad that I used it in the book. It's, to me, a more vivid metaphor. It is now a cultural touchstone in its own right. I talked about the tipping point and the way that that book has become this sort of wild success over so many years. And to me, this way of thinking changes the culture, and it changes the way that people who are spreading media think about what it is that they're doing. So, one paradox in this so-called dichotomy between viral and spreadable is that spreaders want to go viral. You think about, the keyboard cat. I brought up a representative keyboard cat video. There's no sound, but do you guys know keyboard cat? Keyboard cat is this internet meme where you take a very weird piece of footage and then keyboard cat plays you off. So the idea is you've done something so stupid that now that the piano playing cat is going to get you off stage. It's funnier with the sound. Anyway, this is one of these sort of internet memes that's going around right now. It's very much an example of remix culture. Every keyboard cat video is different, and it's different people splicing in the same footage to create their own instance of the type. So a good outcome for somebody making a keyboard cat video is to get remixed. But a better outcome is to get 100,000 views. So there's a sense in which you can not like the viral metaphor, and you can even try not to use it, but the fact is it's out there. A lot of people are responding to it. A lot of people who are seen not as professional message creators, but as so-called amateurs, are very interested in the idea, and they're hoping to get in on that themselves. So what does this have to do with flash mobs? I guess to sort of come around to it backwards, flash mobs got me very interested in this universe. But what really this book is about is me sort of taking flash mobs almost as a kind of a metaphor for the way that the internet has changed, like all of these different precincts of culture. A lot of the conclusions that I arrive at are they're not necessarily ones that other people haven't come to before. Just about the speed, about the way in which it creates sort of more overnight sensations and sort of hits us with this barrage of novelty all the time. But my book is a sort of first-person narrative journey through that world. I have a thing about the Mob Project, which I've already talked about. So, but yeah, so the original email was about 60 people, and very quickly it became into this strange worldwide fad. And so I found myself, on some level, in the same position as the outsiders who were asking me, well, what's the Flash Mob Project all about? I found myself asking, well, why are people so interested in this? And a lot of those questions led me to write the book, which sort of touches on politics. It touches on subcultural fads. I have a whole chapter about indie rock, our marketing, in sort of meme making more generally. So I think I'll close the presentation portion by just hitting on some themes that I feel like are difficult beyond putting them up here to reduce to PowerPoint bullet points. I'll put them up there as provocative ideas, and if any of you are interested and want to ask about any of them, you can. The first one is, one big theme of my book is that profusion of data about culture changes the way that we make culture. The most vivid example I can think of here is actually from professional media, and it's the most emailed list. 20 years ago, the editor of the Washington Post or the Los Angeles Times would have had no idea about which story in the physical paper, which stories were causing people to pick up the paper and which weren't, which stories people were actually reading, which ones they were clipping out and handing and giving to their friends. Of course, now with the internet, they have that data. And in fact, they get that data in their daily editorial meetings. Now, I'm sure if you ask them well, how does that affect your news judgment? They will tell you, and not in bad faith, that, well, we don't pay too much attention to it. It doesn't influence what we do. But I feel like that just can't possibly be true, because the fact is that when you have that information about what of your content is being looked at and what isn't, then that can't help but influence the way that you make content. On a sort of lighter note, I was on the radio yesterday, and somebody called in and he said, I'm the guy who made the painting of Sarah Palin with a pancake that went viral a few months ago, and now I'm making paintings about Susan Boyle. So it may be that this guy has always made paintings of celebrities, and these are the first to take off. But my suspicion is that this was, Sarah Palin with a pancake was something that he did as a joke. It got a ton of attention, and now he finds himself sort of thinking about how he can continue to court the same sort of attention that he got from his big sensation. So profusion of data changes about culture, changes how we make culture. The second one, which is sort of implicit in what I was just saying, is that media amateurs are learning to think like the pros. I feel like there's a canard out there in the media, this very sort of gauzy idea about the internet amateur, that it is true that the internet has leveled the sort of cultural field to the point that people have access to much bigger audiences than they ever would have had outside of the filter of the mainstream media. But I feel like that what people often say that I don't think follows is that therefore, they're going to displace the big media and put something completely different in its place. In my experience, and in my view on this, when people win an audience, they find themselves slipping into a lot of the same patterns that professionals do. At the end of the day, you're trying to grab attention, which is something that mainstream media outlets have been a skill that they've been honing for, decades or centuries. It's about finding the new thing. It's about creating the new thing or locating it for someone else. It's about putting your own spin on things. It's about, giving people reasons to come and look at what you're doing. And that plus the data, on some level, everybody has their own Nielsen ratings now, and so that on some level was the old crucial distinction between amateur media and professional media. At this point, the amateurs have data that rivals what the professionals get in terms of granularity of which of your pieces of content is taking off and which of them aren't. So that's sort of the second theme I would sort of put up there, is that media amateurs are learning to think like the pros. And the final one, which is perhaps sort of a more kind of controversial push forward along the same lines, which is personal ambition, which I already just talked about, is the desire to create and locate novelty and thereby win an audience. When it all adds up together, it drives a kind of cultural distraction. That it's almost a matter of pure mathematics, that as the media multiply, when you get to the point that we all have the potential to be media, we're all out there trying to win an audience, what we do is to try to create and locate novelty, and the process of trying to create and locate more and more novelty creates more and more novelty. It creates more, sort of more and more stories. In the book I talk about I sort of coined the term the nano story, which I see as the sort of fundamental unit of media transmission today, which is something like Susan Boyle, the sort of quick hit story that everybody becomes very, very obsessed about, and it becomes the subject of all this analyzing and all of this deconstructing and backlashes and satires and everything spins around it, but then it just sucks all the oxygen out of it, and then before you know it, it's gone. So the more creation and location of novelty winds up driving more and more stories told in shorter form, which in turn leads to a sort of cultural distraction. So I think I'll leave it with that. So that's my website and my email address, and that's what the book looks like. But I hope that some of you might have some questions. I didn't talk much about the flash mob. I can totally talk more about that. I can talk more about some of these ideas that I put up there, or I can talk about anything that you guys want. Anybody? Thank you.
something I'm not clear about. What do you mean by cultural distraction? Could you give some examples of that?
Sure. I mean, I think about things a lot through the lens of American politics. One of the phenomena that you see during an election cycle, for example, is that people become very, very obsessed with tiny little gaffes or controversies that might come out of a candidate's past. It's the sort of thing that's called the politics of personal destruction. And obviously that's been with us for, the entire history of democracy. What I find interesting about the acceleration of media is that so much of a premium is placed on speed, and so much of a premium is placed on controversy and novelty that you have, these election cycles tend to happen as this constant barrage of tiny little micro stories about, the candidates and what they did or didn't say, or what they did or didn't mean, what they might or mightn't have done in the past, whether they denied it or they didn't deny it. It's this constant sort of and to me the distraction of that process, the distraction of all these different stories, is driven by the speed of the news cycle and by the quantity of different news organizations that are out there trying to make a name for themselves and trying to break more and more stories. So that's an example out of politics. I also talk about this in the context of indie rock, which is a sort of a musical world that I have long been a fan of. One of the things that struck me as the discourse about that went from being something that was happening in print zines and college radio stations to being something that was happening really largely in blogs and online, is that you would have these waves and waves of miniature sort of hot bands, where over the span of a couple of weeks, everybody in this community would be talking about the same new band, and then suddenly, a few weeks later, they're on to something completely new. So those are two examples, but it's something that I see happening across the board.
Hi, thanks for coming today.
Thanks.
You made a comment about the Heinz ketchup competition and how that was essentially a little arrogant or insulting to the audience, because after all, people just buy ketchup and they use it, and they're not very interested in it on a sort of narrative level. And that strikes me as wrong. That strikes me as this is exactly the kind of thing that people look at and say, well, first of all, it's a challenge. Could I possibly make this interesting? And second of all, if there's going to be a competition, if it was a competition about American Idol, I'd be up against 1 million people. But since it's a competition about Heinz ketchup, I could really, if I do something interesting, I might be the only one.
Right.
And so it strikes me that there's this odd balance, particularly when people are trying to get attention, of trying to pick a topic or an area that seems very novel or out of the way, that they might not be interested in on a daily basis. Could you make any comments on how people decide what to pursue and what to create? Because I don't really get the impression that it's entirely coming from, the fanboy, fangirl, oh, this is my obsession, right, as much as it's coming from, oh boy, if I do this, people will pay attention.
No, that's a good point, and it's on some level it speaks to the kinds of strategies that I was alluding to about the idea of people are asking themselves, well, how do I enter the thing that I can win and get some attention and show that I can be funny and show that I can do what I've long dreamed of doing, because on some level this is an expression of all the thwarted creative ambition that lives out there in the world. Jeff Howe in his book Crowdsourcing gives a nice thumbnail sketch of this, which I would sort of put an even starker spin on, which is we encourage people in this country, and this, I think similar things are true in other countries too, where it's like we encourage them to get liberal arts degrees and to pursue their loftiest dreams until around the age of 22 to 25, at which point, hey kid, you got to go make some money, like off you go to law school or business school or someplace where the only thing that you're writing for work is, threatening letters to somebody. And so where does all of that energy go? And it's not just energy, but it's literal training. I mean, you have people who have spent a quarter of their life learning to be something that they will never be for money. And so, yeah, all of that energy is out there. And to your point about Heinz ketchup, I think that that's a very fair point. And by the same token, I agree that the spreadable model makes a lot of sense. And it's not that I think people shouldn't be pursuing it. I'm just saying that there is a kind of, in the same way that there's an arrogance about the viral idea that I'm going to make something that's just so funny or so crazy that people are going to be compelled to hit forward and to pass it along, and that thereby I'm hijacking them with my marketing messages. There is something obviously insulting about that idea, but a lot of people do it because a lot of people, that's how people like to relate to a lot of this media. Similarly, I feel like that there is something inherently a bit arrogant about the spreadable idea, which is that hey, out there in the world there are going to be a non-vanishing number of people who want to make an ad about Heinz ketchup. But as you point out, there are enough people that you can make something like that and get a response. In terms of your sort of actual your sort of latter point about what causes people to sort of take one outlet or another outlet, that on that thing I just have no idea. You just and I tried in the book to in one of the chapters of the book, I enter this competition to create a website that gets as many hits as possible. This was something put on by the Huffington Post. It was called the Contagious Festival. And it was such a neat idea because it was just so starkly about the numbers. There was one rule, or there were two rules: no porn and no spam to promote your entry. But other than that, you put up a website, and the one that gets the most hits at the end of the month wins $2,500. And so you would have 120 entries in any given month, ranging from really slick produced stuff to really kind of cheesy, underproduced stuff to just things that you just couldn't even figure out what they were. Clearly, just somebody just didn't understand what it took to get people to look at things. And so I went out as a journalist and interviewed some of the people. And so that was sort of the closest I got to trying to answer that question. On some level, you ask that question to people, and it's almost like, they don't even know how to answer it. Because it's part of this basic human. It's this basic human need. People they have an idea and they want to get it out there and they want for people to see it. And it's on some level, it is the kind of gauzy, sentimental thing that everybody tries to say about the internet. But then on the other level, it's the same motivation that causes people, like me, to want to write a book and to, get to come and talk to Google with a projector. The idea that you think something and you want to be able to express it to other people. So I don't really know, and I have no idea how it'll evolve. Anybody
Cool.
else?
Well, Bill, I did have one other question about the whole flash mob phenomenon. I was wondering if you could talk about, your perspective as it's developed and, and its sort of state in the present day and the future where, municipalities are cracking down on the whole phenomenon and, whether it's coming too mainstream or what your take is on all that.
Yeah, sure. Well, so in the book, I mostly write about the flash mob phenomenon as a sort of short-lived fad in the summer of 2003, because there was this moment of about 3-month window when I sort of did the first one in New York, and then other people started copying. Much to my surprise, other people started copying the idea, and it suddenly became this strange worldwide fad. And then by September, interest in it had completely died out. Which isn't to say that there weren't people here and there still doing flash mobs, but this sense of this kind of charging, growing, driving, movement. People wanted to think of flash mobs as a movement, which I always thought was crazy because it was just absurd and weird, and then it died out. I would say a lot of stuff that gets called flash mobs now is more in the tradition of certain absurdist events in public space that have been going on for a long time, especially here in the Bay Area. You have the guys at Laughing Squid and the whole Burning Man community has been involved in a lot of really cool public space stuff. Out of London, you had Reclaim the Streets. The stuff that the Madagascar Society. There are a lot of groups that have done for many years, like sort of not just 10-minute gatherings that are put together entirely by last-minute sort of email or text message propagation, which is sort of how I see the flash mob. But instead, it's like the word flash mob has now migrated into the lexicon to mean sort of any impromptu gathering like that people don't expect in a public space where people descend on a park and have a fight or whatever. My feeling is that it is, I don't know that I would say it's going anywhere, in that it's really just about fun. It's about showing the potential of what the technology can do. It's about taking these virtual communities that exist and making them very physical. Far more interesting, of course, is what you see happening in Iran, or what you see happening in some cultures where freedom of expression and freedom of assembly don't really exist. In those places, these information tools that in this country are almost just feeding our hunger for novelty and ephemera, over there it's food to a starving person. That their diet is so information poor and so freedom poor that the ability to organize with text messaging and Twitter is just an incredible godsend. And so what I will find especially interesting is looking to those sort of developing countries, in undemocratic countries, to see whether these organizing technologies actually help not just to have a demonstration effect of showing the use of the technology, but of actually helping to affect real political change there. And I think the answer to that is we don't know yet, but we can hope.
I was just going to, you can definitely, but just a note on that. We had Clay Shirky here to talk about Here Comes Everybody, and he definitely had some interesting points about how, I guess what you would call flash mobs are being used to give political agency almost to some people, and personal agency as well, to put pressure on political entities, put up pressure on people who've wronged them. He cites some cases about a woman who lost her cell phone and somehow gets the whole internet to sort of rally against the person that stole her cell phone. I mean, it's sort of interesting that flash mobs can have that capacity. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's just, it's an extension of the same basic idea, which is that you can incredibly quickly. I mean, in some ways, it speaks more to sort of point of Jeff Howe's book about crowdsourcing, the idea that you can, put out a call, and even if a tiny fraction of the people who hear the call answer it and come to your aid, the fact is that if your megaphone is big enough and the internet allows, everyday people to get very big megaphones in terms of the social networks that they can broadcast stuff to, you can suddenly find hundreds of people there to help you find your lost cell phone, or find personal information about the guy who wronged you, or have a rally to try to bring down the government. And that is one of the things that's just so remarkable about the technology.
Hello. I wondered if you see a future where these liberal arts majors you mentioned can quit their stultifying jobs and make money off of their amateur viral creations, and if so, how that might happen.
Well, I would love to say that I think the answer is yes. My worry is that we're actually headed into a world where not only can they not make money off of their creations, but in fact the professionals can no longer make money off of their creations either. And so everyone will be forced into the stultifying jobs in the underground salt mines. I hope that dystopic future does not come to pass. But yeah, I mean, people haven't really figured out a model yet to do it, and I really hope that people do, because it's what you see coming out of this kind of internet space, a lot of it is direct, but you see a lot of incredible stuff coming out of it too, and you find a lot of people who you wish could quit with whatever else they have to do and just keep doing the thing that they're doing that so many people love.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what may change the magnitude or the length of time that something stays viral. I mean, there's like Gladwell talks about networks of people, and then there's like books like Made to Stick that have formulas for what kind of makes it kind of stay with people. I want to get your thoughts.
Sure. Well, as for magnitude, in the chapter that I was talking about with the Huffington Post Festival, I spent a lot of time talking to Jonah Peretti, who's was the technology director of the Huffington Post and who founded that competition, and he runs a site called BuzzFeed that's a sort of online trend tracking site, and is a very smart guy in this stuff. And he has a very simple rule of thumb, which on some level is just stating the obvious, but when you sort of think about it, it helps you to think through these questions about how you get more people to look at what you're doing, which is, there needs to be a social hook in the sense that, even if you're just replicating instead of remixing, even if you are taking a link to something and you're just forwarding it along, that's still an active choice that says, like, who's going to like this? My mom is going to like this. Well, why is that true? And the answer, by and large, is that the media has something to do with the relationship that you have with your mom. And it could be something as simple as, this is a cute animal and I know my mom likes cute animals, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why cute animals are one of the universal internet viral strategies. But it could also be something like, I know my mom's a gardener and this has to do with gardening, or this reminds me of my uncle so-and-so, or, there's some kind of a social hook. Like at the point that we were doing the competition, the #1 most emailed story on the New York Times site was something called What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage. And it was by an animal trainer talking about how the secrets of animal training could be applied to relationships. Now you can immediately see why. I mean, that was the most emailed story for months, and you can immediately see why, right? Because it had to do with animals first and foremost. But second of all, it was a very funny kind of take on relationships that, you would just naturally think of forwarding to your spouse or to your boyfriend or girlfriend. You might send it to, your friend who is in a bad relationship or a good relationship or something where it related to something that they were talking about. Anybody who would ever complain to you about, like, oh, I can't get my boyfriend to clean up this, or I can't get my girlfriend to do this, you say, oh, like here's a funny tip for you. And then plus there was this scientific angle also, and there's a community of people who are interested in that. And so you can, when you think about things in terms of the individual acts of forwarding, I think that can be really useful on the question of magnitude, on the question of how you get the thing to spread as widely as possible. On the question of duration, that to me is a vexed question, and it's a lot of what I'm meditating on in the book. What I have found in sort of instance after instance is something that really, really got people's attention in a very intense way, and not in a way that seemed ephemeral, in a way that, in fact, you think about something like Susan Boyle. To me, what was interesting, and she's this woman on Britain's Got Talent who was sort of this kind of middle-aged woman, and no one expected her to have a very nice singing voice, and she came out and sang very beautifully, and people were so touched, and it became this worldwide viral sensation. And what I found amazing about that phenomenon, for example, was not just how widely the video spread, but how much it became an occasion for analysis and soul searching about, well, why do we love Susan Boyle? And she's a symbol of all these things about our culture. Maybe Susan Boyle is the success of her is a hallmark of some new model where we don't care so much about youth and beauty. And there's a sense that she becomes something so big, but then you look just a couple weeks down the line and it's just all gone. Where these phenomena that you can't imagine them having engaged people more than they did, and yet then you look down the road and you see that they've completely disappeared. The exceptions tend to be platforms. They tend to be things that people can use to make more media. There were a point at which there was a faddish element to social networking sites themselves. So, you look at the rise and fall of Friendster and you sort of say, well, that had some of the same kind of viral spike and viral drop-off. But then at the point where, Facebook got so much traction, at this point you look at Facebook and you think, well, that's something that's never going away. Obviously, I'm sort of conflating a lot of different things, but I guess the main sort of feeling of sort of consternation in my book has to do with the amplitude question, has to do with how few things, even very good and compelling things that flicker through our consciousness, how few of them are able to survive very long in this climate.
It sort of seems like what you're talking about boils down to musings on the 15 seconds of fame phenomenon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In sort of thinking about it a little bit more, it seems like the videos that I tend to forward on, they'll sort of have a concentration, but then months down the road, I'll have a conversation with someone and I'll remember that video and forward it again, and then there'll be another spurt of forwarding that on to 20 people. A few more months go by, another conversation, forward on to 20 people again. So maybe the key is something that relates to recurring episodes in pop culture. I know one of them that comes to mind is a little clip from Back to the Future. Back to the Future seems to be one of those pop culture icons that you can just relate to it over and over again.
Right.
And so anything that's recurring like that and you can think of and comes up in conversations frequently and with new people, you can say, hey, I have this video, forward that onto them. So something about the recurring, that can keep things alive.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, one of the sort of strange things about my book that it may work or it may not, and I hope that some of you, pick it up and you can be the judge of this, is that, I try to consider internet memes and, indie rock bands and sort of political ideas and political, smears and negative information and viral marketing as I try to consider them as sort of instances of the same type. But there are obviously ways in which lumping all that stuff together and looking at the ways that they behave similarly, it breaks down to a certain extent. And sort of to your point about the little clip of Back to the Future, like you totally see how something like that can spiral out and become bigger and bigger, and the person who figures out how to make money out of owning that clip to Back to the Future, that's going to be a rich guy. But of course that's part of the whole thing about internet memes is that they're so small and they're so kind of inherently frivolous that I'm sort of less interested in how they behave per se than I am in the ways that some of this more sort of ostensibly serious stuff behaves like Keyboard Cat or like a little clip of Back to the Future. The way that it tends to be a part of a conversation for a brief time and then flicker out. Yeah.
So questions like that, questions like what makes a meme successful and what makes it last long would seem to fit in something that you might call memetics or some sort of study of memes, right? But the idea of a meme is itself a meme, which has been around for 40 years or so, right?
Right.
And so it seems surprising that there hasn't been it hasn't become sort of a formal study of memes. So then there hasn't become sort of some sense of let's figure out, let's experiment, let's use our scientific knowledge to understand why a meme is successful or not, and what goes into memes. So
people tried to do that, I don't know that much about it, but from what I've been able to glean, there were some people out of both out of the biological world that were sort of inspired by Dawkins' creation of the idea, and the people out of the more kind of informatics world tried to create a study of memetics and to do exactly what you're describing. But it seems to have fizzled out, in part because I think just on a sociological reason, because I think Dawkins himself became skeptical about the idea that memetics could be a science, and at the point where the inventor of the term started to back away from the idea that it was actually a scientific concept and instead seemed to think of it as more of a metaphor, I think some of the people who would have been inclined to get into it and to try to make it a real science backed away from it. but also, when you actually get into it and try to say, well, what is a meme? Which part of the idea is being transmitted and which part isn't? Like, what does it even mean for an idea to reside in a human brain? Also, the question of sort of to Henry Jenkins's point, where how do you say that replication has occurred? Because everybody, every idea as it passes from my mind to your mind, it's going to sit in your mind in a somewhat different way with a totally different set of associations. Are they really the same idea? The more you get into this stuff, the more that you realize that it's very, very difficult to do it scientifically. That really you can gesture at it at the level of metaphor, but to try to do it on a more scientific level is just going to be too inexact to contemplate.
But on some level, the stuff is there, right? Like there is a notion of an idea, and it is in your mind, and you're thinking about it, and then you express that idea to someone else, and then they're thinking about it, right? So the metaphor isn't completely metaphorical. It's really, there is something going on, and there is sort of a biological and psychological aspect to it,
the idea of an idea, this is the sort of thing that the whole discipline of philosophy of mind was invented to try to talk about. And even today, there are, dinner party ending arguments in the philosophy of mind universe about whether an idea is even a concept that has a physical correlate, that could possibly have a physical correlate in the brain, or whether, as we learn more about the neural structure of the brain, whether we're going to wind up jettisoning all of our concepts of mind based on what we're learning about the brain. And that actually, in that universe, is the position that I think is probably the most accurate, is one called eliminative materialism, which is the idea that the brain, as opposed to dualism, that what is happening up there is obviously a product of the physical brain, but that the more we learn about that brain, the more that we're going to have to jettison the very concepts that we tend to think of about mind. So it's trickier than I think a lot of people expect it to be. But on the other hand, I'm sure somebody will take a stab at it. So maybe you should quit your job and become a memeticist.
It seems like during your presentation you expressed displeasure with the fact that so many people producing media have this extreme obsession with getting eyes to look at it rather than just producing good media. What do you see as kind of being a proper mindset for somebody producing media?
No, I would actually, I have a kind of sardonic perspective on that, but I actually I don't have a displeasure in that at all. If anything, I find myself way more frustrated with people who want to project all of this kind of gauzy innocence onto so-called amateurs in the internet space, when they themselves, are jetting around the country talking at technology forums and making six-figure incomes, describing what it is that these amateurs are doing. It's as if they think that what the amateurs want isn't to sort of be where they are, to be the one, or not exactly where they are, but the point being that, in the same way that you're, publishing your technology book, or you're at the TED convention, loftily giving your presentation about what amateurs are doing online, what the amateurs want is a version of the same sort of thing. Like, they would love to have an audience as big as the professionals. They would love to get noticed for their ideas, or for their creativity, or for their art. They're not necessarily rapacious about it. They're just, they're out there trying to get people to pay attention to them, and in the same way that you are if you're an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. So, to me, the mindset, and obviously that's not the mindset of everybody. There are certainly people out there who, are just very, very satisfied to, talk to their friends, and then the community of people that follows them gets, slightly bigger and slightly bigger and slightly bigger, and they say, hey, that's great. They're not ambitious about it. And I think that's absolutely true. I stress the other side of it. I stress the ambition side of it, precisely because I think that it's somewhat insulting to the amateurs not to give them credit for the ambition that they have, and not to understand that their ambition on some level is a product of the same thing that drives the kinds of people who get up and give talks at technology conferences. Anybody else?
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all
Bill
so much
Wasik.
for coming out.